My name is Linda. If you want to hear more stories from seniors, subscribe to the channel Her Voice Tales and let me know where you are listening from. I never imagined that at 58 years old, still working part-time at the library and attending my Pilates classes twice a week, I would be standing in my own kitchen, trembling with a mixture of cold shock and burning rage, holding my son David's smartphone. He had left it charging on the granite island while he ran out to get bagels for his wife, Jessica. The screen had lit up with a series of notifications, and the preview of the message from Jessica froze the blood in my veins. I locked in the arrangement with the care facility. Babe. The manager said they have a room opening next month. Finally, we are getting rid of your mother. The house will be ours, and we can start the renovations. I stared at the words, reading them over and over again until they blurred behind the tears gathering in my eyes. Care facility? Getting rid of me? I wasn't an invalid. I wasn't senile. I was a vibrant woman who had simply been too generous for her own good. I sat heavily on one of the bar stools, feeling the silence of the house I had built with my late husband, Thomas, closing in on me. It was a terrifying realization that the people you love the most, the people you sacrificed everything for, could view you not as a person, but as an obstacle to be removed. To understand the depth of this betrayal, you have to understand how we got here. My husband Thomas passed away 5 years ago from a sudden heart attack. It devastated me, but I didn't crumble. I kept our beautiful 4-bedroom colonial house in the suburbs pristine. I kept my garden blooming. I kept living. Then, 8 months ago, my son David, who is only 28, and his wife Jessica, 26, came to me with a sob story. They were drowning in credit card debt, their rent in the city had skyrocketed, and they needed a place to stay to get back on their feet. David had looked at me with those big brown eyes that used to melt my heart when he was a toddler, begging for help. It's just for a few months, Mom, he had promised, holding Jessica's hand. Just until we save for a down payment on our own place. We won't get in your way. I agreed, of course. I'm a mother. You never stop wanting to protect your children. I moved out of the master suite, the room I had shared with Thomas for 30 years, and into the smaller guest room down the hall so they could have privacy and space. I thought I was being a supportive mother. I didn't realize I was inviting vipers into my sanctuary. The first month was bearable, mostly an adjustment period. But slowly, the dynamic shifted. It wasn't an explosion, it was an erosion. Jessica, who didn't work and spent her days building her brand on social media, began to take over the common spaces. My cozy living room, filled with family photos and Thomas's favorite books, was rearranged to provide better backgrounds for her videos. My kitchen, where I had taught David how to make pancakes, became a disaster zone of dirty blenders and avocado toast crusts that she expected me to clean up. When I gently asked her to load the dishwasher, she would sigh, that long, exaggerated exhale of a teenager asked to take out the trash, and say, "Oh, Margaret, relax. I was getting to it. You're so high-strung lately. Is it menopause?" The first time she said it, I was too stunned to reply. I simply cleaned the mess myself. That was my mistake. My silence was permission. David, my sweet boy, changed too. He worked long hours at an accounting firm, or so he said, but when he came home, he didn't want to hear about my day. He would grab a beer, sink into the recliner I had bought for his father, and zone out. If I tried to engage him, Jessica would cut in. "Babe, leave your mom alone. She's probably tired. Old people need their rest." I am 58. I wanted to scream. I hike on weekends. But I held my tongue, thinking it was just the stress of their financial situation. But it wasn't stress. It was a calculated campaign. Over the last 3 months, the atmosphere in the house had turned sinister. Jessica started treating me not like the homeowner, but like a confused, elderly dependent. It started with small things. Was the grief catching up to me and eating away at my brain? I made an appointment with my doctor, terrified. Dr. Evans ran every test. Cognitive function, blood work, MRI. He told me I was as sharp as a tack. "Margaret," he had said, "there is absolutely nothing wrong with your memory. That was the moment the seed of suspicion was planted. If I wasn't forgetting things, someone was moving them. I looked down at the phone in my hand again. The screen had gone dark, but the message was burned into my retinas. Finally getting rid of her. It wasn't just about living rent-free. They wanted the house. My house. The house meant to be David's inheritance one day, far in the future, was now the target of a hostile takeover. I heard the front door unlock. Panic surged through me. I couldn't let them know I knew. Not yet. I needed a plan. I quickly wiped the screen with my sleeve to remove fingerprints and placed it back on the island, exactly at the angle I had found it. I turned to the sink and started scrubbing a pot, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Hey, Mom," David called out, walking into the kitchen with a paper bag. "Got the bagels? Everything okay?" I forced myself to turn around and smile. It was the hardest performance of my life. "Hello, dear. Yes, just cleaning up a bit. You know how I like a tidy kitchen." Jessica strolled in behind him, looking at her phone, barely acknowledging my presence. She was wearing one of my silk robes, the one Thomas had bought me for our 25th anniversary. I felt a spike of anger so sharp it almost doubled me over. "Did you see my phone?" David asked, reaching for it. "Yeah, it buzzed a few times," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I didn't check it." David glanced at the screen, read the notification, and I saw his shoulders stiffen. He quickly shoved the phone into his pocket and exchanged a quick, loaded glance with Jessica. She smirked, a tiny, cruel curling of her lips. "So, Margaret," Jessica said, hopping up onto the counter, something I had asked her 1,000 times not to do. "We were thinking. You've been looking so tired lately. The house is so big to manage, all these stairs, the garden. Don't you think it's becoming too much for you?" Here it comes, I thought. The pitch. "I feel fine, Jessica," I replied, drying my hands. "Actually, I was thinking of repainting the hallway next week." Jessica laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "Repainting? At your age? You shouldn't be climbing ladders. David and I were talking, and we really think you should consider a more supportive environment. A place with people your own age, where you don't have to worry about maintenance." "A nursing home?" I asked, testing the waters. No, not a nursing home." David interjected quickly, looking guilty. "A retirement community. Assisted living. High-end stuff, Mom. Like a resort." "A resort that costs $5,000 a month?" I asked. "Well," Jessica said, inspecting her manicure, "we figured since you have your pension and the savings Dad left you, you could afford the best. And we would take over the house, obviously. We'd take the burden off your shoulders. We'd pay the utilities, manage the property. It stays in the family." "It stays in the family, meaning you live here for free while I rot in a facility." The words almost slipped out, but I bit my tongue. "I'm not ready to leave my home, David," I said softly. "This is where your father and I built our life." Jessica rolled her eyes. I saw it. She actually rolled her eyes. "God, Margaret, don't be so dramatic. It's just a building. You need to think about what's practical. You're becoming a danger to yourself. The stove? The lost keys? Last week you left the front door wide open all night." I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. But I didn't argue. "I'll think about it," I lied. The relief on their faces was sickening. "Great," Jessica said, hopping off the counter. "I'll make some coffee. You go rest, Margaret. You look pale." I retreated to my room, the small guest room, and locked the door. I sat on the twin bed and let the tears flow for exactly 5 minutes. I cried for the son I thought I had raised. I cried for the loss of the illusion of family. But after 5 minutes, I wiped my face. Thomas used to say I was the strongest woman he knew. "Margaret," he'd say, "you have a backbone of steel." It was time to prove him right. I wasn't going to be packed away like an old winter coat. I was going to fight. And I had an advantage they didn't know about. I wasn't the sweet, oblivious mother anymore. I was a woman with nothing to lose. I waited until I heard them leave for brunch with friends later that afternoon. As soon as their car pulled out of the driveway, I went to work. I needed evidence. I knew Jessica was sloppy. She was arrogant, and arrogance makes people careless. She had left her laptop open on the coffee table in the living room. I felt a pang of guilt. I had never snooped in my life, but I pushed it aside. This was survival. I sat down and tapped the spacebar. It was password protected. Of course. But I remembered watching her type it in once. It was her own birthday. 041297. I typed it in. The screen unlocked. I went straight to her email. What I found made the text message seem mild. There were threads between her and a real estate agent. Subject: valuation for renovation. They were already getting quotes on how much the house would be worth if they knocked down the wall between the kitchen and dining room, my dining room. There were emails to a facility called Sunny Meadows. I opened the brochure attached. It wasn't a resort. It was a budget state-subsidized facility with horrible reviews. Bed sores, neglect, stolen medication. This wasn't about getting me the best care. It was about warehousing me as cheaply as possible so they could siphon my pension and sell my house. Then I found the chat logs. She had been messaging her mother. The old bag is buying the Dementia Act. I moved her pills yesterday and she freaked out. David is soft, but I'm working on him. Once she signs the power of attorney, we are golden. We can sell the house in a year and move to LA like we planned. Sell the house? They had told me they wanted to raise a family here. It was all a lie. Every kind word, every meal shared, every moment of the last 6 months was a manipulation designed to steal my life's work. I took photos of every email, every chat log, every quote with my own phone. My hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, but from a cold, hard fury. I was 58. I had 20, maybe 30 good years left. And they wanted to end my life now so they could fund their delusions of grandeur in Los Angeles. I closed the laptop and wiped the keys. I went upstairs to the attic. I dug through the old filing cabinets until I found the deed to the house. It was in my name. Solely. Thomas had insisted on it. If anything happens to me, he had said, I want you to be secure. I found my bank statements. I had substantial savings, money Thomas and I had scrimped for decades to accumulate. They wanted access to that too. The power of attorney Jessica mentioned. That was the key. They needed me to sign over my rights. That's why they were gaslighting me, trying to make me believe I was incompetent. If I was incompetent, David could petition the court for guardianship if I didn't sign voluntarily. I heard the garage door opening. They were back early. I quickly put the documents back, but kept copies in my tote bag. I went downstairs, composing my face into a mask of tired fragility. If they wanted a confused old woman, I would give them one. For now. Margaret. Jessica called out. We brought you a muffin. Since you probably forgot to eat. Oh, thank you, dear, I said, making my voice quaver slightly. I was just looking for my glasses. I can't seem to find them anywhere. They were on my head. I knew they were there. Jessica smirked at David. See, she mouthed. David looked pained, but he nodded. They're on your head, Mom, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Oh, silly me, I chuckled nervously. I don't know what's happening to me lately. It's okay, Margaret, Jessica said, patting my arm with a touch that felt like ice. We are here to take care of everything. Actually, since we are talking about it, David has a friend who is a lawyer. He drafted up some papers just to, help manage things. I feel so overwhelmed. Exactly, Jessica said, her eyes gleaming with triumph. So we'll do it tomorrow morning. We'll have a nice breakfast, sign the papers, and then we can talk about Sunny Meadows. It really is beautiful, Margaret. They have bingo nights. Bingo nights. I hate bingo. I read Dostoevsky and listened to true crime podcasts. But I nodded. Okay. Tomorrow. That night, I laid in the dark, listening to the house settle. I heard them giggling in the master bedroom, my bedroom. They were celebrating. They thought they had one. They thought Emily Miller, no, Margaret, I am Margaret, was done. But they had made a fatal error. They had underestimated the woman who raised the man they were betting on. I wasn't going to sign anything. At 7 a.m., I waited until David went into the shower and Jessica was still asleep. I slipped out of the house. I didn't take my car. They might hear the engine. I walked 3 blocks to the 24-hour diner and called a taxi. My destination wasn't the doctor or the grocery store. It was the office of Mr. Henderson, the family attorney who had handled Thomas's estate. He had retired, but his daughter, Sarah, had taken over the firm. Sarah had been David's classmate in high school. She was sharp, ethical, and owed me a favor for tutoring her in English Lit all those years ago. But I'm going to show them exactly how sharp my memory is. I pulled the sheaf of printed photos and emails from my bag. And I have proof of conspiracy to commit fraud and elder abuse. I want to know my options. Sarah looked through the documents, her face hardening. Mrs. Miller, this isn't just grounds for eviction. This is criminal. The chat logs about the medication? If they actually messed with your pills, that's assault. I know, I said, my voice steady. But I don't want to send my son to jail. Not yet. I just want him out of my house. I want them both out. Today. We can do that, Sarah said, pulling out a legal pad. It's a process, usually 30 days, but given the evidence of abuse and the hostile environment, we can file for an emergency protective order which would force them out immediately. Or, we can serve them with a 30-day notice and you stay elsewhere. But... No, I interrupted. I am not leaving my house. They are. Okay, Sarah said. Then we serve them. I'll come with you. We'll bring a sheriff's deputy to keep the peace while we serve the notice. But Mrs. Miller, are you sure? This burns the bridge completely. I thought about the text message. Finally getting rid of her. The bridge is already ashes, Sarah. They burned it. I'm just clearing the rubble. We spent the next 2 hours drafting the documents. I updated my will, disinheriting David until further notice, and set up a trust for a charity I supported, just to be safe. By 11 a.m., we were ready. I got into Sarah's car, and we followed the deputy's cruiser back to my quiet suburban street. My heart was pounding as we pulled into the driveway. David's car was there. They were probably wondering where I was, probably panicking that their goose with the golden egg had wandered off. I walked up the path to the front door, flanked by Sarah and the uniformed officer. I used my key, the spare one I kept hidden in the garden, since they had stolen my main set. I opened the door. David? Jessica? I called out, my voice ringing clear and strong. David came running from the kitchen, looking frantic. Mom! Where the hell have you been? We were about to call the police. We thought you got lost. Jessica was right behind him, looking annoyed. Seriously, Margaret, you can't just wander off like that. We have the notary coming in an hour for the papers. They stopped dead when they saw Sarah and the police officer standing behind me. Mom! David said, his face draining of color. What is this? Hello, David. Hello, Jessica, I said, standing tall. You remember Sarah, don't you? And this is Officer Miller, no relation. Mrs. Miller requested a civil standby, the officer said, his face impassive. Why? Jessica asked, her voice shrill. Is she confused? Did she tell you she was lost? No, Jessica, I said, stepping forward. I'm not confused. In fact, I have never been more clear. I reached into my bag and pulled out the manila envelope Sarah had prepared. I tossed it onto the hallway table. It landed with a heavy slap. What is that? David asked, looking at the envelope like it was a bomb. That, I said, is a formal notice of eviction. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. He looked like a child caught stealing from the cookie jar, but this was no cookie jar. This was my life. Mom, please, he stammered. You're misunderstanding. We were joking. It was just blowing off steam. I read the emails, David. I saw the quotes for the renovation. I saw the brochure for Sunny Meadows. Don't insult my intelligence. I took a breath. I raised you to be a good man. I failed. But I won't fail myself. You can't do this, Jessica hissed, stepping forward aggressively. The officer stepped in, his hand resting on his belt. Step back, he ordered. Jessica froze. This is my house, she screamed. No, I said softly. It never was. It was a kindness I extended to you. A kindness you repaid with cruelty. You have 1 hour to pack your essentials and leave. If you are not out, the officer will arrest you for trespassing. And Jessica, if you ever touch my medication again, I will see you in prison. I walked past them, into the kitchen, and poured myself a cup of the coffee Jessica had made. My hands were still trembling, but I felt a strange, cold power flowing through me. I heard them running upstairs, the sounds of suitcases being dragged, Jessica screaming at David, David crying. I stood by the window, looking out at my roses. They were beautiful, resilient, thorny, just like me. The silence that followed the slamming of the front door was heavy, physical, and vibrating with the echoes of the chaos that had just unfolded. I stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at the wood grain of the door, my hand still gripping the handle of the coffee mug so tightly my knuckles were white. The officer, Officer Miller, cleared his throat gently, pulling me back from the precipice of my own shock. He asked if I was all right, if I needed him to stay longer. I assured him I was fine, thanked him for his presence, and watched him leave. As his cruiser pulled away, the reality of what I had just done crashed down on me. I had evicted my own son. I had called the police on my own flesh and blood. The mother part of me wanted to run after the car, to beg David to come back, to fix him a sandwich and tell him everything would be okay. But the Margaret part of me, the woman who had seen the emails, the woman who had been gaslit for months, stood firm. I locked the deadbolt. Then I engaged the chain. Then, for good measure, I dragged a heavy oak chair from the dining room and wedged it under the doorknob. I spent the first hour simply walking through my house, reclaiming it room by room. It was like surveying the aftermath of a natural disaster. In the living room, Jessica's influence was everywhere. My antique velvet curtains had been knotted up to let in better light for her videos. Coasters were ignored. Wet rings marred the surface of the mahogany coffee table Thomas had restored by hand. But the worst was the guest room, my room for the past 8 months. I walked in and felt a wave of nausea. It smelled of stale air and confinement. I stripped the sheets off the twin bed, the sheets that had been my prison while they played house in my master suite. I bundled them up and threw them directly into the trash. I wouldn't wash them. I didn't want the memory of that helplessness to linger. Then, I went to the master bedroom. My sanctuary. I pushed the door open and gasped. It was unrecognizable. Clothes were strewn everywhere, David's work shirts, Jessica's flimsy tops, covering the floor like a colorful, chaotic carpet. Makeup stains smeared the vanity where I used to keep my pearls. Half-empty water bottles and take-out containers sat on the nightstands, festering. The air was thick with the scent of Jessica's cloying perfume and unwashed laundry. I felt violated. This was the bed where Thomas and I had whispered our dreams in the dark. This was the room where I had nursed David when he was a baby. And they had turned it into a frat house. I didn't cry. I was past tears. I went to the garage, got the heavy-duty trash bags, and started cleaning. I didn't sort. I didn't check pockets. If they had left it behind in their haste, it went into the bag. Clothes, charges, toiletries, it all went. I wasn't their maid anymore. I was the landlord, and they were the evicted tenants who had trashed the place. By evening, I had 6 black bags lined up by the curb. I had scrubbed the vanity with bleach until my hands were raw. I had opened every window to let the cold, crisp autumn air chase out their scent. I made the bed with fresh linens, my crisp white cotton ones with the lavender sachet tucked in the folds. I sat on the edge of the mattress, the house finally quiet, finally mine again. But the peace was short-lived. My phone, which I had left on the kitchen counter, began to ring. It wasn't David. It was my sister-in-law, Karen, Thomas's sister. Karen lived 3 states away and usually only called on birthdays. I picked up, expecting perhaps she had heard through the grapevine, maybe checking in. "Margaret, what on earth is going on?" Her voice was shrill, piercing my ear. "David just called me in hysterics. He says you threw them out on the street? He says you had the police draw guns on them? Margaret, tell me he's exaggerating. You can't possibly have done that to your own son." The manipulation hadn't stopped, it had just changed venues. David was spinning the narrative, playing the victim to anyone who would listen. "Hello, Karen," I said, my voice calm, contrasting her panic. No guns were drawn. A civil standby officer was present to ensure my safety while I served an eviction notice. Safety? From David? He's a teddy bear. And eviction? Margaret, they are family. You don't evict family. He said you've been acting strange lately, forgetting things, getting paranoid. He's worried sick about you, and this is how you repay him? By making him homeless. The anger flared in my chest, hot and bright. Did he tell you about the emails, Karen? Did he tell you about the plan to put me in Sunny Meadows, a state facility with a 1-star rating, so they could sell this house and move to Los Angeles? Did he tell you they were discussing how to get power of attorney over my finances by claiming I was incompetent? There was a silence on the other end. A long, stunned silence. What? No. He said. He said they were looking into assisted living because you left the stove on. I never left the stove on, I said, cutting her off. They turned it on to make me think I was losing my mind. They gaslit me, Karen. 4 months. They planned to steal everything Thomas and I built. So yes, I threw them out. And frankly, they're lucky I didn't press charges for elder abuse and fraud. If you want to take them in, be my guest. But check your bank statements and hide your jewelry. I hung up before she could respond. I blocked her number. I blocked my niece. I blocked anyone I thought might be a flying monkey for David and Jessica. I wasn't going to justify my survival to people who weren't there when I was hiding in my own guest room, afraid to make a sound. The next morning, I went to work at the library. I needed the routine. I needed to be Margaret the librarian, not Margaret the victim. My colleagues, bless them, didn't ask questions, though I suspect I looked different. Taller. Harder. I was shelving books in the fiction section when my phone buzzed in my pocket. A notification from social media. I rarely checked it, but something compelled me to look. It was a post from Jessica. She had tagged me. The photo was of her, tear-streaked face, holding a bag, sitting in what looked like a cheap motel room. The caption read, "Heartbroken. We tried so hard to care for David's mom as her dementia progressed. We gave up our apartment, our lives, to be there for her. But the disease makes people aggressive. She kicked us out today in a fit of confusion and rage. We are safe, but homeless. Please pray for us and for her. We just want her to be safe. Hashtag dementia awareness, hashtag eldercare, hashtag heartless." The comments were flooding in. "Oh my God, poor you. Stay strong, Jess. The system is so broken for caregivers. How could she? You guys are saints." I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. Saints. They were painting themselves as martyrs and me as a senile aggressor. It was brilliant, in a sick, twisted way. If I tried to defend myself online, I would look like the aggressive, confused old woman they described. "See," they would say. "Look how angry she is." It was a trap. I pocketed the phone and walked straight to the head librarian's office. "Janet," I said, I need to take an early lunch. I have a legal matter to attend to. I went straight back to Sarah's office. When I showed her the post, she let out a low whistle. This is defamation, she said. But it's also smart. They're trying to build a public record of your instability in case they want to contest the eviction or challenge your competency later in court. What do I do? I asked. Do I reply? Absolutely not, Sarah said. You do not engage in the mud. We fight with paper. I'm going to send a cease and desist order regarding the social media posts. And Mrs. Miller, I think it's time we get that restraining order finalized. This is harassment. They are trying to destroy your reputation to cover their tracks. Do it, I said. And Sarah? I want to change the locks. Today. I already have a locksmith on call for you, she smiled. He'll meet you at the house at 5 o'clock. That evening, as the locksmith drilled into the front door, stripping away the old mechanism that David had a key to, I felt a physical weight lift off my chest. The new keys were heavy, brass, and solitary. Only I had them. No one else. I was safe. Or so I thought. 2 days later, on a Thursday evening, I was in the kitchen making soup. A simple vegetable soup, the kind David used to hate but Thomas loved. The doorbell rang. My stomach dropped. I checked the peephole. It was David. Alone. He looked terrible. Unshaven, wearing the same clothes he had left in. He held a bouquet of cheap gas station flowers. Mom, he called through the door. Mom, please. I know you're in there. I saw the light. Please, just open the door. I'm alone. Jessica isn't here. I didn't open it. What do you want, David? I shouted through the wood. I want to talk. I want to explain. Mom, I made a mistake. A huge mistake. I left her. My breath hitched. He left her? What do you mean? Jessica. I left her. I realized you were right. She's crazy, Mom. She made me do it. She kept saying we needed the money, that you were sick. I didn't want to believe it, but she was so convincing. I've been sleeping in the car. I have nowhere to go. Please. I'm your son. I messed up. I'm so sorry. He started sobbing. The sound tore at my heart. This was my boy. My little boy who used to scrape his knees and run to me for a kiss. He was saying exactly what I wanted to hear. That it was all her fault. That he was a victim too. That he had chosen me over her. My hand hovered over the deadbolt. He was alone. He was crying. Maybe he had snapped out of it. Maybe the shock of the eviction had broken her spell over him. I unlocked the deadbolt. I turned the handle. I opened the door just a crack, keeping the chain engaged. David looked up, his eyes red and swollen. Mom, he whispered. Thank God. Please. Just let me come in. I'm so hungry. I looked at him, really looked at him. And then I saw it. A quick, almost imperceptible glance he threw over his shoulder toward the bushes by the driveway. It was a reflex. A check. And in the reflection of the porch light on his car window parked on the street, I saw a silhouette. Someone was sitting in the passenger seat. It was a setup. If I let him in, he would refuse to leave. He would establish residency again. Or worse, he would let her in. You're lying, I said, my voice cold as ice. She's in the car, isn't she? David's face shifted instantly. The sorrow vanished, replaced by a flash of panic and then anger. No. She's not. I swear. Mom, stop being so paranoid. Open the goddamn door. Go back to your wife, David, I said. And don't come back until you've grown a spine. You selfish bitch, he screamed, slamming his fist against the door. You're going to die alone in this big empty house. And when you do, we'll piss on your grave. I slammed the door shut and locked the deadbolt. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood, shaking uncontrollably. The mask had slipped. The remorseful son was just another role he was playing, scripted by Jessica. The realization hurt more than the initial betrayal. The first time, I could blame his weakness. This time, I had to accept his malice. He wasn't just a pawn, he was a willing participant. He was willing to manipulate my love for him to get back into the house so they could finish what they started. I called Sarah immediately. He was here, I told her, my voice trembling. He tried to trick his way in. Did you let him in? Sarah asked sharply. No. I saw through it. Good. Did he threaten you? Yes. Okay. That's enough for the full restraining order. We go to court Monday. Mrs. Miller, you need to be prepared. Monday is going to be ugly. They will be there. They will lie. They will try to make you look unstable in front of the judge. You need to be rock solid. I will be, I promised. The weekend was a blur of anxiety. I didn't leave the house. I installed security cameras, a doorbell cam and 2 floodlight cameras for the backyard. I spent my savings on security instead of the vacation Thomas and I had never got to take. I watched the feeds on my iPad like a hawk. Every car that passed slowly, every noise in the night, made me jump. I felt like a besieged soldier in my own fortress. Monday morning arrived. I dressed in my best suit, a navy blue ensemble that made me look professional and composed. I pulled my grey hair back into a neat chignon. I applied light makeup to hide the dark circles under my eyes. I looked in the mirror. You are Margaret Miller, I told my reflection. You are not a victim. I met Sarah at the courthouse. David and Jessica were already there, sitting on a bench outside the courtroom. They looked polished. Jessica was wearing a modest dress and a cardigan, her hair simple, no heavy makeup. She looked like a sweet, innocent schoolteacher. David was in a suit, looking somber. They were playing the part of the concerned, grieving children. When they saw me, Jessica stood up. Margaret, she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. Oh, thank God. We were so worried. Have you been taking your meds? She said it loud enough for the people nearby to hear. A lawyer passing by glanced at me with pity. Save it for the judge, Jessica, I said, walking past them without breaking stride. Inside the courtroom, the air was stale and tense. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Reynolds, called our case. Sarah presented our evidence efficiently: the emails, the chat logs about the medication, the text message about getting rid of the old lady, the police report from the eviction. Then it was their turn. They didn't have a lawyer. They couldn't afford one. Jessica spoke for them. Your Honor, she said, her voice trembling perfectly. We love Margaret. She's not well. These emails she found? They're out of context. We were joking about a movie we watched. And the medication, we never touched her pills. She forgets to take them, and when we remind her, she gets paranoid. We were looking into facilities because we found her wandering the neighborhood at night in her nightgown. We just want her to be safe. We are terrified she's going to hurt herself living alone. It was a compelling lie. A he said she said. And they had the advantage of youth and the stereotype of the confused elderly woman on their side. Judge Reynolds looked at me, her gaze scrutiny heavy. Mrs. Miller, the judge said, do you have any response to these allegations of wandering and confusion? I stood up. I didn't look at David or Jessica. I looked straight at the judge. Your Honor, I work 20 hours a week as a librarian cataloging archives. I instruct a Pilates class on Tuesdays. I manage my own finances, which my son and his wife were attempting to gain control of. The wandering they describe never happened. But what did happen was a systematic attempt to gaslight a grieving widow to steal her home. I am not confused. I am heartbroken. But I am fully competent. The judge looked at the documents again. She looked at the timestamp on the text message. Relax, babe. I will put the old lady in the nursing home. The text message seems quite specific for a movie quote, Judge Reynolds noted dryly. She looked at Jessica. What movie was it, Mrs. Miller? Jessica froze. It was. I think it was a Netflix thing. I don't remember the title. I see, the judge said. And the emails to Sunny Meadows requesting pricing for indigent care? Was that also a movie plot? Jessica stammered, turning red. David looked at his shoes. I am granting the permanent restraining order, the judge ruled, slamming her gavel. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, you are to stay 500 yards away from the plaintiff and her residence. You are to cease all contact, direct or indirect, including social media. If you violate this, you will be arrested. And frankly, you should be grateful the plaintiff isn't pressing criminal charges for fraud today. Get out of my courtroom. I let out a breath I felt I had been holding for a week. We had won. Legally, at least. As we walked out, Jessica brushed past me. She leaned in, her voice a venomous hiss, low enough that the bailiff couldn't hear. This isn't over, you old hag. You think you've won? You have no one. You'll slip in the shower one day, and no one will find you for weeks. You're already dead. I stopped. I turned to look at her. Maybe, I said calmly. But tonight, I'll sleep in my own house, in peace. And you'll sleep. Where is it you're staying? The Motel 6. Jessica's face crumpled in rage, but David pulled her away before she could scream. I watched them walk down the hallway, arguing, miserable, defeated. The photograph was grainy, taken from a distance. It showed me standing in my kitchen window, taken from the backyard. The timestamp was from last night. The note read, "We aren't going anywhere, Mom. We know where you sleep." The blood drained from my face. I had cameras. How had they? I looked up at the floodlight camera above the garage. It had been spray-painted black. They hadn't left town. They hadn't given up. The court order was just a piece of paper to them. They were watching me. I rushed inside, locking the door, my hands shaking so hard I dropped the keys. I wasn't dealing with greedy children anymore. I was dealing with desperate, dangerous people who felt they had nothing left to lose. And they were right outside. The terror that gripped me in the hallway lasted exactly 10 seconds. It was a cold, sharp spike of adrenaline that made my heart hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. But as I stared at the blackened camera lens and the threatening note in my hand, something snapped. It wasn't my mind, as they had hoped. It was my fear. It shattered, leaving behind a jagged, diamond-hard resolve. They had invaded my sanctuary. They had mocked my love. And now, they were hunting me in my own home. They thought they were dealing with a fragile old woman who would crumble under pressure. They had forgotten that before I was a mother, before I was a librarian, I was a survivor. I didn't cower in the bedroom. I walked straight to the kitchen, avoiding the windows, and called Sarah. "They are here," I said, my voice steady. "They painted the cameras. They left a note. They are watching the house." Sarah didn't waste time with platitudes. "Call 911 immediately," she ordered. "I'm calling a private security firm I use for high-risk clients. Police response time is too slow for a direct threat. Lock yourself in a room with no windows." I called the police, but as I suspected, they said a painted camera and a note were suspicious, but unless there was an active break-in, they could only send a patrol car when available. I knew what that meant. I was on my own until they crossed the threshold. But I wasn't going to wait to be a victim. I went to the basement. Not to hide, but to the circuit breaker. I cut the power to the external lights. If they were watching, let them think I was asleep. Let them think the house was dark and vulnerable. 20 minutes later, a black unmarked sedan pulled into my driveway, its headlights off. A massive man named Mr. Thorne stepped out. He was Sarah's private security contact. He looked like a mountain carved out of granite. I let him in the side door. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Sarah says you have a pest problem." "I have intruders who think this house is an easy target," I replied. "I want them stopped." Thorne nodded. "Go upstairs. Lock your door. I'll sit in the dark in the kitchen. If they come in, they won't get past the refrigerator." I went upstairs, but I didn't sleep. I sat in the chair by my bedroom door, listening. The silence of the house was heavy, charged with anticipation. It was 2 a.m. when I heard it. The sound of glass breaking in the back sunroom. It was subtle, a muffled tick, followed by the groan of a window sash being forced up. My heart stopped, then restarted with a vengeance. They were actually doing it. They were breaking in. I heard footsteps. 2 sets. Soft, trying to be stealthy. They were whispering. "Be quiet, you idiot," Jessica's voice hissed. "She's probably deaf anyway." "I don't like this, Jess," David's voice trembled. "What if she wakes up?" "Then we scare her," she spat. "We scare her until she has a heart attack. Or until she signs the papers. We need the money, David. We have nothing." They moved into the kitchen. I held my breath, waiting for Mr. Thorne. Suddenly, a voice like thunder erupted from the darkness downstairs. "Freeze. Down on the ground. Now." Then, chaos. A scream from Jessica. A shout of terror from David. The sound of bodies hitting the floor hard. The blinding beam of a tactical flashlight slicing through the dark. "Do not move. Hands where I can see them." I stood up, unlocked my bedroom door, and walked to the top of the stairs. I flipped the master switch for the hall lights. The scene below was pathetic and satisfying. David and Jessica were face down on my kitchen tiles, their hands zip-tied behind their backs. Mr. Thorne stood over them, looking bored. The back door was open, and in the distance, I could hear the sirens of the police finally arriving. I walked down the stairs slowly, my hand gliding over the banister. David twisted his head to look up at me. His face was pressed against the floor, his nose bleeding slightly. When he saw me, he started to cry. "Mom! Mom! Help! He attacked us. We were just coming to check on you." "Check on me?" I asked, stopping on the last step. "By breaking a window at 2 a.m.? By painting my cameras black?" "It was Jessica," he blubbered, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the dirt on the floor. "She made me do it. She said we had to get the deed. Mom, please, I'm your son. Tell him to let me go." I looked at Jessica. She wasn't crying. She was glaring at me with pure, undiluted hatred. "You old witch," she spat. "You should have just died. You have so much and we have nothing. It's not fair." "Fair?" I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "I worked for 40 years. I saved. I sacrificed. You wanted to steal my life because you were too lazy to build your own." The police burst in a moment later, guns drawn, but lowered them when they saw the situation was under control. They took statements. They collected the note from my pocket. They took photos of the broken window and the painted camera. When they hauled David and Jessica up to their feet, the reality of the situation finally hit my son. He wasn't going to a hotel. He was going to a cell. "Mom!" he screamed as they dragged him out the door. "Mom, don't let them take me. I'm sorry. I love you. Mom." His voice cracked, reverting to the tone of a scared little boy. A part of me, the old Margaret, wanted to weep. But the new Margaret, the one forged in the fire of their betrayal, stood still. "Officer," I said calmly, "I want to press full charges. Breaking and entering, stalking, harassment, attempted robbery. Everything." "Understood, the officer said, looking at me with respect. "We have enough here to put them away for a long time." As the squad cars pulled away, flashing red and blue lights painting my living room walls, I didn't feel sad. I felt a massive, crushing weight lift off my shoulders. The parasites were gone. The threat was neutralized. I turned to Mr. Thorne. "Thank you," I said. "Send the bill to my lawyer. I'll pay double." "You did good, Mrs. Miller," he said, packing up his gear. "You kept your head." The next few months were a blur of legal proceedings. I didn't miss a single court date. I sat in the front row, impeccable in my suits, watching David and Jessica turn on each other. Their love evaporated the moment the pressure was applied. Jessica blamed David, calling him the mastermind. David blamed Jessica, calling her manipulative. It didn't matter. The evidence I had gathered, the emails, the texts, the note, the break-in, was overwhelming. They were both sentenced to 5 years in prison for burglary, conspiracy, and stalking. When the gavel fell for the final time, David looked back at me. He looked older, hollow. He mouthed the word please. I looked him in the eye and gave him a small, sad nod. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a goodbye. I was releasing him. I was releasing the burden of being his mother, a job I had been fired from the moment he decided I was disposable. 1 year later, I wake up at 6:30 a.m. without an alarm. The morning sun filters through the sheer curtains of the master bedroom, which is now painted a soft, serene sage green. The clutter is gone. The smell of stale perfume is a distant memory. The house smells of lemon oil and fresh coffee. I go downstairs to the kitchen. It is quiet, but it is not empty. Sitting at the island is Matteo, a 22-year-old medical student I rent the spare room to. After the trial, I realized the house was too big for just me, but I didn't want to leave. So, I joined a home share program that matches seniors with graduate students. Matteo gets cheap rent. I get someone to help with the heavy lifting and the sense of life in the house. "Good morning, Margaret," Matteo says, looking up from his anatomy textbook. I made coffee, and I fixed that loose hinge on the back gate. "Thank you, Matteo," I smile, pouring myself a cup. "You're a lifesaver. How is the studying going?" "Intense. But I'll survive. By the way, your roses are going crazy. They look beautiful." I walk out to the back garden with my mug. My roses, which had been neglected during the chaotic months of David and Jessica's occupation, are now in full, glorious bloom. Vibrant reds, yellows, and pinks. I touch a petal, soft as velvet. I am 59 years old. I am alone in the sense that I have no husband and no children who speak to me. But I am not lonely. I have my book club on Tuesdays. I have my Pilates. I have Matteo, who treats me with more respect in a month than David did in years. I have Sarah, who has become a dear friend. I have my dignity. People often think that silence in a house is a sign of sadness. They think an older woman living without family is a tragedy. They are wrong. I take a sip of coffee and look at the spot where the police took my son away. I feel nothing but relief. I learned the hard way that blood is biology, but family is behavior. I learned that you teach people how to treat you, and if you don't set boundaries, they will erase you. I was almost erased. I was almost the old lady in the nursing home. But I fought back. The phone rings inside. It's probably Karen, trying to guilt-trip me again about visiting David in prison. I don't answer it. I don't have to. I stand in my garden, surrounded by the life I reclaimed, and I listen to the wind in the trees. It is the most beautiful sound in the world. It is the sound of peace. And for the first time in my life, I am completely, unapologetically, free.